At exactly 9:43 a.m. Philippine time, something unprecedented began deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. A magnitude 7.4 earthquake tore through the seafloor off Mindanao, sending shockwaves racing across the island chain. But instead of the typical pattern of diminishing aftershocks, something extraordinary happened. The fault system started feeding on itself. Dr. Sarah Chen, monitoring the event from the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, watched in disbelief as her screens registered not dozens but hundreds of follow-up earthquakes. 820 aftershocks in just 24 hours. A number so extreme, it forced scientists to question whether they understood earthquake mechanics at all. It's like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion, Chen reported to her supervisors. Each tremor is perfectly timed to stress the next fault segment. The impossible aftershock sequence revealed something far more sinister than a single earthquake. Hidden beneath the Philippines lies a network of interconnected faults, and the October 10th quake had found a way to activate all of them at once. Seismic data shows stress pulses radiating outward from the main rupture, jumping from fault to fault in a pattern scientists are calling seismic contagion. But the 820 aftershocks were just the beginning. The stress transfer is still active, still spreading, and it's now approaching the major fault systems that could trigger magnitude 8 plus earthquakes across the entire Ring of Fire. So what happens when a single earthquake learns how to wake up every sleeping giant in the Pacific? And how do you stop a seismic chain reaction that's already rewriting the rules of how the Earth breaks apart? The Philippines sits at one of the most geologically volatile positions on Earth. This archipelago of over 7,600 islands straddles the boundaries of four major tectonic plates: the Philippine Sea Plate, the Eurasian Plate, the Indo-Australian Plate, and the Pacific Plate. This convergence creates a tectonic pressure cooker unlike anywhere else on the planet. What makes the Philippine tectonic setting uniquely dangerous is the Philippine Trench, a massive 1,320-kilometer subduction zone where the Philippine Sea Plate plunges beneath the Sunda Plate at a rate of approximately 10 centimeters per year. This convergence doesn't happen smoothly. It happens in violent jerks we experience as earthquakes. The October 10th quake originated 48 kilometers offshore of Davao Oriental Province in eastern Mindanao, at a relatively shallow depth of 23 kilometers. This position is particularly significant because it sits at the junction where the Philippine Trench meets the inland Philippine fault system, essentially a seismic highway that runs the entire length of the archipelago. Dr. Maria Fernandez, lead seismologist at PH15OLCS, explains, "What makes the Philippines unique is that we don't just have isolated fault lines, we have an interconnected web of faults. When one section fails, it can transfer stress to adjacent segments, potentially triggering a cascading failure across the network. This network effect is what makes Philippine earthquakes so dangerous. The archipelago experiences over 100 measurable earthquakes annually, but most follow predictable patterns governed by fundamental laws of seismic science. The most important of these is Omori's law, first formulated by Japanese seismologist Fusakichi Omori in 1894. This fundamental principle states that aftershock frequency decreases proportionally to the inverse of time since the main shock. In simpler terms, aftershocks should rapidly diminish in both frequency and magnitude following a large earthquake. For a typical magnitude 7.4 earthquake, seismologists would expect approximately 30 to 50 significant aftershocks over several weeks, with the vast majority occurring in the first 72 hours. The frequency should follow a smooth exponential decay curve, with each passing day bringing fewer and smaller shocks. Professor James Nakamura of Tokyo University elaborates, "Omori's law has been one of the most reliable principles in seismology for over a century. It's held true for virtually every major earthquake sequence we've recorded globally, until now. The reason this law works is because earthquakes release accumulated stress along fault lines. Once the initial rupture occurs, nearby sections may still contain enough residual stress to trigger smaller aftershocks, but this stress dissipates over time and distance from the epicenter. It's a natural dampening system that prevents earthquakes from spiraling out of control. At least, that's how it's supposed to work. When the magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck off Mindanao on October the 10th, the initial response followed standard protocols. FIVO-LCS issued a tsunami warning for coastal areas of Davao Oriental, Surigao del Sur, and Surigao del Norte, with evacuation orders for residents in low-lying regions. Within the first hour, seismograph stations across Mindanao registered 47 aftershocks, already an unusually high number, but not yet cause for scientific alarm. Then something unprecedented began to unfold. Dr. James Patterson, monitoring the data stream at the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, noticed the pattern first. By hour 3, we'd recorded 98 aftershocks. That's when I realized something wasn't following the standard model. I called my supervisor, but by the time she arrived, the counter had jumped to 112. Hour by hour, the aftershock count continued to defy all statistical models. Hour 6, 156 aftershocks. Hour 9, 248 aftershocks. Hour 12, 341 aftershocks. Hour 18, 591 aftershocks. Hour 24, 820 aftershocks. The phenomenon so completely violated Omori's law that the automatic computer systems at several seismic monitoring stations crashed, unable to process what their algorithms deemed mathematically impossible. We had to manually override the system, explains FIVO-LCS technician Manuel Santos. The software was designed to flag statistical anomalies as potential equipment malfunctions. It literally couldn't accept that these readings were real. What made the sequence even more baffling was the spatial distribution of these aftershocks. In a typical aftershock sequence, most events cluster around the main rupture zone, gradually diminishing with distance. The Mindanao sequence showed aftershocks systematically propagating away from the initial epicenter, activating fault segments that should have remained dormant. When plotted on a map, the pattern resembled a neural network firing in sequence, each aftershock appearing to trigger the next in a coordinated cascade that seismologists had never witnessed before. Dr. Lisa Wong, a geophysicist at Stanford University, describes what happened next. Around hour 15, we noticed something truly extraordinary. The aftershocks began occurring in pulses, almost like a heartbeat, with clusters of 5 to 7 events happening in 11-minute intervals. This suggests a coordinated stress transfer mechanism that we've never seen documented in scientific literature. By the end of the first 24 hours, the 820 aftershocks had traced a distinct pattern across the Philippine fault system, revealing connections between fault segments that geologists had never identified before. Previously believed were isolated. The unprecedented aftershock sequence following the Mindanao earthquake has forced scientists to reconsider fundamental principles of seismic behavior. To understand why this earthquake broke all the rules, we need to examine what those rules are. The scientific community has long relied on 3 core empirical laws to predict aftershock behavior. First, Omori's law, which states that aftershock frequency should decrease with the reciprocal of time following the main shock. This law has been refined into the Utsu-Omori formula, which introduces additional parameters to account for variations in decay rates. Second, the Gutenberg-Richter relationship, which describes the frequency-magnitude distribution of earthquakes, predicting that each decrease in magnitude should correspond to a 10-fold increase in frequency. Third, Barth's law, which states that the difference in magnitude between a main shock and its largest aftershock typically remains constant at around 1.2 magnitude units, regardless of the main shock's size. Together, these laws have successfully described almost every major earthquake sequence recorded in modern history, until the Philippines event shattered all 3 simultaneously. Dr. Elena Suarez, theoretical seismologist at Caltech, explains the implications. What we're seeing in the Philippines defies our most established models. Instead of a standard decay curve, the aftershock rate maintained an almost constant level for hours, then increased in periodic bursts. This suggests some form of regenerative feedback mechanism that we've never documented before. The spatial distribution of these aftershocks provides the most disturbing clue to what's happening beneath the Philippines. Using advanced 3D modeling, seismologists have identified what appears to be systematic stress transfer between interconnected fault networks. It's as if the initial earthquake triggered a chain reaction through the fault system, explains Dr. Robert Chen of the USGS. Each aftershock appears perfectly positioned to trigger the next segment in line, like toppling dominoes across the Philippine archipelago. Most concerning is the timing pattern that emerged as the sequence continued. After the first 12 hours, aftershocks began occurring in coordinated pulses at approximately 11-minute intervals, a phenomenon some scientists have termed seismic synchronization. This synchronized pulsing bears disturbing similarities to what physicists call a phase transition, when a system suddenly shifts from one state to another. In this case, the Philippine fault network may have transitioned from independent segments to a coordinated system behaving as a single entity. What we're witnessing may be the seismological cubal equivalent of a phase transition, warns Dr. Hiroshi Takahashi from Tokyo University. If the fault system has indeed become synchronized, we could be seeing the early stages of a much larger seismic event developing across the entire network. Computer simulations attempting to model this behavior have produced alarming projections. The stress transfer appears to be migrating systematically northward through the Philippine fault system, approaching the densely populated island of Luzon, home to the capital Manila and over 64 million people. The implications of what's happening beneath the Philippines extend far beyond scientific curiosity. They represent a potential paradigm shift in how we understand earthquake hazards globally, especially within the Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire, circling the Pacific Ocean, accounts for approximately 90% of the world's seismic activity. Scientists have long studied connections between different segments of this massive tectonic boundary, but the Philippine event suggests these connections may be more immediate and dynamic than previously thought. Dr. Caroline Reyes, director of the Pacific Rim Seismic Monitoring Network, explains the alarming possibility. If what we're seeing in the Philippines represents a new form of seismic behavior, what we're calling seismic contagion, it raises the possibility that large earthquakes could trigger coordinated responses across much greater distances than we've accounted for in our hazard models. The most immediate concern is for the Philippines itself. The aftershock sequence has been systematically migrating northward, activating segments of the Philippine fault system as it progresses toward the island of Luzon, home to the capital Manila and over 14 million people. Manila sits precariously close to the West Valley Fault, which is capable of generating magnitude 7.2 plus earthquakes. FIVO LCS has long warned that a major rupture on this fault could result in over 34,000 deaths and collapse up to 170,000 buildings across the metro area. If the current aftershock progression continues its northward migration, it could potentially transfer stress directly to this dangerous fault system. Beyond the Philippines, the pattern of stress transfer has implications for the entire Western Pacific. Seismometers in Taiwan, Japan, and Indonesia have already detected subtle changes in background seismicity following the Mindanao event, possible early indicators that the stress redistribution is propagating throughout the Ring of Fire network. Of particular concern is the historical precedent for earthquake sequences triggering distant events. Following the 2004 Sumatra earthquake, scientists documented increased seismic activity across the Indian Ocean basin for years afterward. If the Philippines event represents an even more efficient mechanism of stress transfer, the ripple effects could be far more widespread. Dr. Michael Chen from the USGS explains, "What makes this situation particularly concerning is the evidence of synchronized activity. When fault systems begin operating in synchrony, they can potentially release far more energy than when operating independently. It's similar to how soldiers are instructed not to march in step when crossing bridges. Synchronized forces can amplify beyond what structures are designed to withstand. Real-time monitoring has become crucial as scientists race to understand and predict the evolving situation. FIVA-LCS has deployed additional mobile monitoring stations across the Philippines, while international agencies have redirected satellite resources to provide continuous observation of ground deformation across the Western Pacific. Emergency response agencies throughout the region have been placed on high alert, with particular emphasis on coastal communities vulnerable to both earthquake damage and potential tsunami threats. The unique pattern of this earthquake sequence suggests standard evacuation protocols may need revision, as the danger zone appears to be expanding rather than diminishing with time. 3 weeks after the initial magnitude 7.4 earthquake, the scientific community remains divided on what exactly is happening beneath the Philippines. The Aftershock sequence, now numbering over 1,700 events, continues to defy conventional models and predictions. Several competing theories have emerged to explain the unprecedented pattern. The network activation theory, proposed by seismologists at Stanford University, suggests that the Philippine fault system has reached a critical state where even moderate earthquakes can trigger synchronized responses across multiple segments. This theory points to decades of accumulated stress throughout. The system is creating a hair-trigger condition where the entire network is primed for failure. The fluid migration hypothesis, championed by researchers at MIT, proposes that the initial earthquake may have disrupted deep fluid pathways within the crust, allowing pressurized fluids to migrate along fault zones. These fluids could effectively lubricate adjacent fault segments, triggering sequential failures as they propagate through the network. The resonance model, developed by theoretical physicists working with seismologists, suggests that the Philippine tectonic setting may have entered a state of seismic resonance, where stress waves bounce between structural boundaries, creating standing waves that concentrate forces at regular intervals, explaining the pulsed timing of aftershock clusters. Dr. Sarah Nakamura, who first identified the pattern, remains cautious. What's most concerning is that none of our existing models fully explain what we're observing. We're literally witnessing the Earth operate in ways we didn't know were possible. This means our current understanding of earthquake physics is incomplete in fundamental ways. International research teams have converged on the Philippines, deploying advanced monitoring equipment, including deep borehole strain meters, dense GPS networks, and satellite interferometry to capture real-time data on the evolving situation. These efforts represent the largest coordinated seismic research operation since the 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan. The monitoring efforts have revealed another disturbing pattern. Micro-earthquakes too small to be felt at the surface are propagating well beyond the Philippines, with subtle seismic signals detected as far away as Taiwan, eastern Indonesia, and even parts of Japan. This suggests the stress redistribution may be affecting a much larger portion of the Ring of Fire than initially thought. Dr. Robert Chen from the USGS summarizes the current state of understanding. What we're witnessing may be the seismic equivalent of discovering a new fundamental particle in physics. It forces us to reconsider basic assumptions about how earthquake sequences evolve and interact. The implications extend far beyond the Philippines. They could transform how we assess seismic hazards globally. As monitoring continues, the scientific community and emergency management agencies remain on high alert. The unprecedented nature of this event means that standard forecasting models cannot be relied upon, and the potential for larger triggered events remains a serious concern. The Philippines earthquake sequence has become a watershed moment in seismology, a rare instance where nature reveals behaviours that existing science cannot fully explain. Whatever the ultimate explanation proves to be, it's clear that our understanding of how the Earth breaks and heals is being fundamentally rewritten beneath the Philippine archipelago. What we're witnessing in the Philippines isn't just another earthquake. It's potentially the first documented case of a seismic chain reaction that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about tectonic stability across the Ring of Fire. Subscribe to Earth Attacks now for exclusive updates as this unprecedented situation unfolds. Are you in an earthquake zone?